Hi. I'd like to echo everything that Claire has said. It was a very full explanation. This is the low-tech presentation, I'm afraid. No slides, old-fashioned pieces of paper. Amanda and I are the parents of Colette McCulloch. That is a photograph of her, and that is a self-portrait, which tells you a lot about her. That was the way she saw herself. And it's only years later when we realized she was autistic that how much sense that self-portrait and a lot of other pieces of her art and her writing made. Like our book, this talk is called Why Can't You Hear Me? And I better put on my glasses because otherwise I won't even be able to see my script. Why can't you hear me? Because that was how Colette felt most of her life. Cole was autistic, but her autism wasn't diagnosed until she was 33. Like many women and girls, as Claire has said, she masked her condition as she tried to appear normal as possible, whilst always fearing that she would be found out as being weird and different. 2 years after she was diagnosed, she died a totally avoidable death as she walked on the A1 at 3 in the morning. She was at the time in the supposed care of a private mental health facility paid for by the NHS. Autism in general still isn't well understood, but autism in women and girls has only recently been accepted at all. Just 15 years ago, Professor Simon Baron-Cohen considered it to be an almost exclusively male condition brought on by an ultra-male brain. It was thought that autistic women made up a tiny minority of people with autism. We now know that this is not the case. We tend to still address the issue of autism from a male perspective. In popular culture, as has been mentioned, the film Rain Man comes to mind. And then you go through to the TV dramas The A Word and Atypical, very good. But the subjects are all male. This failure to recognize female autism is almost certainly why Colette wasn't diagnosed until so late. I have a nephew who was diagnosed as being Asperger's, aged 8. He's now in his 20s and doing well. Colette was seen by mental health professionals from a similar age, but they didn't pick up on her. Autism presents very differently in girls, as Claire has said. Boys tend to avoid eye contact, talk very little, and don't like being touched. Girls mask their condition by smiling, meeting your eye, and engaging in conversation. Colette was always bubbly, funny, and touchy-feely. Her cousin was the opposite. Both were autistic. As Steve Silberman says in his book Neurotribes, you meet one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The world for Colette always seemed to be alien, always seemed to be against her. As we explain in the book, other people were always a mystery to her, like when first attending university, she was perplexed by her peer group. As she writes, I couldn't comprehend the normality of those around me, what made them tick, and how. I am never able to decipher facial expressions or subtle allusions to this or that. She distrusted medics, often with good reason. Often their diagnoses were wide of the mark or just plain wrong. She felt they didn't listen to her. Again, she writes, It's dark. No one will lift a hand. They won't listen to me. I must take one day at a time, they said. But I can't. And do you know, I really cannot understand the language that you speak. I'll leave it to Amanda to carry on for a moment.
Our Col was always different. She didn't sleep for more than 4 hours a night for 4 years, but she was the happiest little girl in the world, running up and down our living room at 1 a.m. in the morning. We were a bit tired, but she was fine. Everything seemed well, until at 7.5 years came the first diagnosis: dyslexia. It changed everything. She lost her confidence, ate for comfort, got bullied, went to a special school, and deep-seated anxiety became part of her life. At the end of a conference, I can't begin to list the litany of failures in her care. But like all parents of a child who is different, we spent the rest of our life fighting for her rights, whatever the diagnosis morphed into. And it's a long list of diagnoses: OCD, anorexia, depression, alcohol, self-harm, male abuse, borderline personality disorder, and finally, age 33, ASD, autistic spectrum disorder. At each stage, rather like Pilgrim's Progress, she met blocks. Teachers who were dyslexic deniers, the eating disorder unit who refused her a bed when she weighed 29 kilos. We had to get our MP to intervene. The counsellors who refused to give her CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, because she's too complicated. The university psychiatrist who read her recent medical notes on self-harm, and then refused to refer her on, saying, "You need to pull yourself together, young woman." The men who abused her mentally, financially, and of course physically. It didn't take them long to realize she was different. The police took one of them to court for domestic violence. The CPS let her down completely, and the defending solicitor stood up in court and said, "You can't believe a word this young woman's saying. She's got mental health issues." How come Colette, as the plaintiff, could have her health record brought up in court by the man who'd abused her and not be allowed to mention his criminal record, especially since it involved violence? Justice for women? I don't think so. But I need to move on and talk about the rather wonderful Professor Will Mandy. He's a neuropsychologist researching autism in women at University College London. We went to meet him in the midst of writing our book because we'd heard about an article he'd written. He had discovered that 40% of anorexic girls are on the spectrum. As he explained to us, one of the reasons why this is so important is that of necessity, treatment of an autistic anorexic must be adapted for their mindset and will be different from the normal one. It also explains why a lot of girls are not diagnosed as being on the spectrum, because when your child is dying from starvation, like ours, you don't look for anything else, do you? And in hindsight, we can finally understand why the amazing team who cared for her at the Maudsley for 3 years couldn't reach her. I'm going to read some of the words Colette wrote in what she called her autobiography. Do I really intend this manuscript of my brief life to be published? Would I want the people I know and love to read exactly how I felt? How I've construed my certain events and passages in time? Do I want people to read about themselves? More importantly, however, do I stand a chance of becoming a writer, a novelist, as I've always wanted to be? And if this were to be published, to appear in the wisdom of the printed word, would it help anyone who's ever struggled with the concept of living and surviving, of finding ways to cope and get through in a world that seems so perpetually demanding? Could it help anyone that's ever suffered? I hope so. Colette.
So, Colette leaves university, aged 29. She has no friends, no job, zero self-confidence. She has split up with the one decent boyfriend she'd had. She suffered from acute anxiety, and as her writing makes clear, she cannot decipher what people really mean when they talk to her. Now out in the world, the men she met up with were increasingly on the margins of society. Her relationships were often violent and with criminal men. She lost all self-respect and self-worth. Her life was going downhill. These are all classic symptoms of autism in women and girls. She had been assessed and treated by therapists, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists since the age of 12, yet not one of them had even mentioned the possibility of ASD, Autistic Spectrum Disorder. The acronyms go on. It took another 3 years while her life unraveled before she was diagnosed initially by a nurse practitioner and then a psychologist. Both were women. Her male psychiatrist had doubted the diagnosis. When it was confirmed to him, he had the grace to go on a course on autism in women. So, after 21 years of struggle, the actual root cause of Cole's distress had been identified, but far too much psychological damage had been done. The medics all agreed she needed professional care if she was to have a life, but after 18 months, Sussex NHS Trust had been unable to place her anywhere. Her life continued to deteriorate. Then they found her a placement at a private clinic 100 miles away. Milton Park claimed in its glossy brochure to be a specialist clinic for people with autism. They boasted individual, person-centered treatment. It was PR nonsense. The placement was an unmitigated disaster. There was virtually no treatment at all. She saw her psychologist for 50 minutes a week. That was it. They let her go missing at weekends and stay out at cheap hotels with disastrous results. She eventually attempted suicide by jumping from a bridge into the river. She was dragged out and taken to A&E, then back to Milton Park Clinic. But staff there didn't even talk to her about it. After 7 months in their care, she died, run over by a lorry at 3 a.m. on the nearby A1. Clearly, there were questions to be answered as to how she came to be there when she should have been being looked after in the care home. We thought the inquest would do just that. But Coroner Pears, at our first PIR, pre-inquest review, thought otherwise. He said no investigation was needed. It was a simple road traffic accident. Only 2 witnesses, the police and the lorry driver, would be called. It should take less than an hour. He was rude, adversarial, and incompetent. He clearly just wanted to sweep this unimportant young woman's death under the carpet and move on. After that first PIR with Pears, we consulted Mary Varney at Leigh. She made it clear Given the manner of her death, Colette's human rights had been transgressed. Thus, a full Article 2 human rights inquest must be carried out. The last third of our book is about how, with Mary Varney and Doughty Street Chambers, we took Coroner Pears to the High Court for a judicial review. It's a really scary process. He fought us every inch of the way. He threatened to charge us for his legal fees, despite the fact that they're covered by the state, but his legal fees as well as our own if we lost. We were facing a bill of $30,000 going up to $60,000 if we lost. Only 36% of judicial reviews are successful. Daunting odds. Pears delayed proceedings. He didn't answer Mary's emails. At one PIR, he even publicly accused our barrister, Keelan Gallagher QC, of trying to blackmail him. After a blistering response from her, he retracted the accusation. We had to run a crowd justice campaign to raise the funds to fight him. Our backers were amazing. It took almost 2 years of public campaigning, but in the end, we forced Pears to recuse himself before we got to the judicial review, and he admitted his bias against us. His replacement coroner was a total contrast. Martin Oldham was humane, thorough, and fair. He placed Colette at the centre of the inquiry. He wanted to know who she was. He read her writing. He looked at her artwork. He conducted a 7-day inquest with 20-odd witnesses, including 2 eminent experts on autism, whose evidence was damning of Colette's care. Martin Oldham's conclusions exposed multiple failings on the part of Sussex NHS Trust, the AMHP service, and in particular, Milton Park Clinic. I'll read you a couple of excerpts from his conclusions. I have spent some time looking at the Milton Park records for the period after Colette was given notice, and it makes most uncomfortable reading. The records show a disastrous situation, and for the most part, it is difficult to understand how Colette was being helped, if at all. Colette's death was an avoidable tragedy. She was failed by the lack of a mental health assessment and by an inadequate regime at Milton Park, which left her at large on the day of her death for far too long. She had, in fact, been missing from the clinic for 17 hours before they called the police. It is of note that Milton Park changed its name shortly after the inquest. It is now called Lakeside. There's not a lake within 30 miles of the place, but it's a reassuring name. Ownership of the facility has changed 3 times in the period we had contact with it. I'd like to finish by reading some of Cole's writing, titled Broken Teapot, which sums up her feelings about her treatment, and I suspect the feelings of quite a lot of other women and girls who have suffered from autism. So, is this the answer to breaking out? That my arms are tied, my eyes filled with the mists of your deception? I call it that not because you wish to deceive, but because the colours of your perception have been mixed all wrong. To understand me, you read a book that claimed to explain all my dilemmas. You set out with the express and good intention of solving the mysteries of this oversensitive, high-activated CD player that picks up on all particles of dust, hindering sweet music's issue. But what you missed, or what your blessed Bible forgot to relate, was this one and simple rule. I am the sum of my parts. Without my tape deck, my stop, play, record, There is no I, no me to which definition could be given. I am an entity bereft of that other part that makes me function, that makes me whole. I'm a teapot without a handle. I'll burn you when you touch. Thank you.